Lately, things between me and Mark just haven't felt the same. I'm not sure when exactly it started, but it's like a fog has descended over our relationship, and I can't seem to shake it off. We've been married for almost 7 years now, and for the longest time, everything felt right. He was everything I wanted in a partner. Reliable, kind, caring, all the things you'd want in a husband. But over the past few months, something changed. It wasn't that he did anything wrong, per se. He still took care of me, still worked hard, still came home every night, and told me he loved me. But there was a distance between us. It wasn't the kind of distance you could put your finger on. It wasn't like we were fighting or anything, but we had stopped really seeing each other, you know. He'd sit on the couch scrolling through his phone while I made dinner. We'd go to bed at the same time, but he was always half asleep before his head even hit the pillow, and I was left to lie there, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how the days all seemed to blend into one another. It's strange, because I used to feel so wanted by him. When we first got together, he'd look at me like I was the only person in the room. He made me feel special. But now I don't know. I guess I started to feel invisible, like I was just going through the motions. I'd get dressed for work in the morning and catch a glimpse of myself in the mirror, and I didn't recognize the person staring back at me. I felt old. Not in the literal sense. I'm still in my early 30s, but in the sense that I'd become someone else. Someone who wasn't the person I once was. It wasn't like I wanted to feel desired by other people, but somewhere deep inside, I started to miss the feeling of being noticed. I started wondering if I was still that girl, the girl who could turn heads, the girl who could make someone's heart skip a beat. Because, with Mark, it felt like I had disappeared into the background. I guess that's why I didn't think twice when I got a message one afternoon from Jake. Jake was my ex from college, the one who'd always been a little too much of a flirt for my taste, but who I had shared some pretty great memories with. We hadn't kept in touch after I started dating Mark, but he was one of those people who was still in the back of your mind, you know. You remember the good things about them, the fun dates, the carefree times. In the back of my mind, Jake was that guy who had always made me feel alive, and even though I hadn't seen him in years, I remembered the way he made me laugh. So when he reached out, asking how I was doing, saying it had been so long, all the usual polite catching up stuff, I didn't see any harm in responding. I was just bored, honestly. Mark was out of town on a business trip, and I had nothing to do that evening, so why not? I didn't think it would lead anywhere. We just exchanged a couple of texts. He mentioned he was back in town for a few days and asked if I wanted to grab coffee. At first, I hesitated. I mean, I'm married, right? But it felt so innocent, so harmless. Just two old friends catching up. And honestly, the thought of seeing someone who remembered me as I used to be, someone who might actually still find me interesting, sounded kind of nice. It wasn't about Mark or about my marriage at that moment. It was just about me, about remembering a time when I felt more than just a wife, when I felt like me. So I agreed. We met at a little cafe downtown. I was nervous when I walked in and saw him sitting at a table near the window, his back to the sun. When he turned around, I saw that same mischievous grin I remembered so well. He hadn't changed a bit. He was still handsome, still charming, still full of that playful energy that always made him the center of attention. I couldn't help but smile. "Well, look at you," he said as I approached the table. "Still as beautiful as ever." I laughed, maybe a little too easily, and sat down across from him. "It's been a long time, Jake." "I know. Right?" He looked me over, clearly appreciating the fact that I had aged well. I won't lie. There was something about the way he looked at me that made me feel good. Mark never looked at me like that anymore. He used to, but somewhere along the way it had stopped. We talked about the usual things at first. Life, work, mutual friends we hadn't seen in years. But then the conversation turned more personal. Jake asked about Mark, how we were doing. I didn't exactly know how to answer. Mark and I were fine, but I could feel that unspoken distance between us. I didn't say anything about it, though. I wasn't about to go into my personal life with an ex I hadn't seen in years. But Jake was persistent. He always had been. "And what about you, Emma?" he asked, his eyes narrowing slightly as if he was trying to gauge me. You happy? I mean, you've got to be, right? I saw you two at that wedding last year. You looked like the perfect couple. I smiled, but it didn't quite reach my eyes. Yeah, I mean, we're good. We're just, life. Jake leaned in, a glint in his eye. It's funny. I remember you back in college. You were always so full of energy, so alive. Sometimes I wonder if you miss that girl. I froze. There it was. The one question I hadn't wanted to hear. But I didn't have to say anything. Jake wasn't stupid. He could see it in my face, the way I hesitated. And that's when the conversation took a turn. He was still playful, still teasing, but there was an edge to it now. A kind of knowing look in his eyes that made my stomach flutter. And just like that, it felt like I was 22 again. Like all the years of marriage and routine had fallen away. And I was the girl who could still get attention. I felt myself drawn to that feeling, even though I knew I shouldn't be. It was just a harmless conversation, right? Well, that's what I told myself. But I was already starting to realize I didn't want it to stop. After that first coffee, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. It wasn't like I'd been waiting for Jake to come back into my life. But now that he had, I couldn't deny the pull. It felt like a little piece of me that I'd forgotten about had been awakened. Something I had buried under years of routines, of being just a wife. With Jake, I was reminded of who I used to be. The girl who laughed loudly, who flirted without care, who had energy that filled the room. It didn't take long for the messages to start coming in. First, just a couple of texts here and there, casual stuff like, "How's your day going?" or "I was thinking about you." But soon it became more frequent. I found myself looking at my phone every time it buzzed, my heart doing that stupid little flip whenever I saw Jake's name on the screen. I had told myself I wasn't going to get caught up in anything. It was just harmless fun. But something inside me started to shift. I began to realize that I was craving more than just the attention. I was craving connection. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed it until Jake made me feel seen again. Not just as Mark's wife, but as me. The person I used to be before I fell into the role of being the good, reliable partner. A few days after our coffee, Jake suggested we meet again. I hesitated at first. It felt a little too much like old times. And there was a nagging voice in the back of my mind telling me to be careful. I didn't want to mess things up with Mark. But then again, I also didn't want to lose the excitement I was starting to feel. I didn't want to go back to feeling invisible. I didn't want to feel like a woman who had let herself disappear into the background. So, I agreed. I told Mark I was meeting a friend for lunch. A vague enough explanation that he didn't ask too many questions. I could tell he didn't notice the subtle changes in me, the way I was suddenly more focused on how I looked before I left the house, the way I started texting a little too quickly when I was out. He trusted me. And why wouldn't he? I had always been honest with him. Jake and I met at a different cafe, this time a little more secluded, away from the busy downtown area. The moment I walked in, I felt a sense of nervous excitement pulse through me. Jake was already there, sitting at a table near the back. When he looked up and saw me, that same mischievous grin spread across his face, and for a second, everything else melted away. The world around me didn't matter. It was just us. "Hey there," he said, standing up as I approached. He didn't hug me this time, but there was something in his eyes. Something deeper, something charged. He pulled out my chair for me, like we were back in college again. I sat down, trying to keep my cool. "It's good to see you again," I said, even though I could feel my heart racing in my chest. "Yeah, I was thinking the same thing," he replied. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "So, what's been going on with you?" "Really?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. It was like I could feel the tension building between us, and I wasn't sure how to handle it. But I couldn't back out now. I didn't want to. I laughed lightly, pushing a strand of hair behind my ear. Same old, work, home, repeat. Mark and I are good, just busy. He raised an eyebrow, clearly not convinced. "You don't look like you're just busy. You look like someone who's been needing a little more fun in her life." His voice was low, teasing, but there was something else in it too. Something that made me feel like he saw right through the surface. I shifted uncomfortably. "Maybe I am," I admitted before I could stop myself. "I don't know. Just feels like everything's so routine." Like it's all the same every day, and I've been stuck in this space where I don't even know who I am anymore. Who I want to be. I hated how vulnerable that sounded, but the words just came tumbling out. Jake looked at me for a long moment, his gaze softening. I get that. I think you've always been more than just the perfect wife, Emma. You've always had this spark, and I can't help but wonder where that spark went. That was it. I was gone. The second he said it, I was pulled in. His words had ignited something in me, something I hadn't realized I'd been missing. That spark. That feeling that I was more than just someone's partner. I leaned forward, the energy between us shifting. I don't even know anymore. It's like I've been living on autopilot. My voice dropped to a whisper, barely audible. But when I'm with you, I remember what it felt like to be alive again. Jakey's lips curled into a slow smile, and I felt a rush of heat spread through me. He reached across the table, brushing his fingers against mine. His touch sent a shiver through me, and I didn't pull away. I didn't want to. I've always liked that about you, he said softly. You never did things by halves. You always threw yourself into everything. You were always so full of life, so unapologetically you. I could feel the air growing heavier around us. The cafe had started to empty out, and it was just the two of us now. It felt like the world had faded away, like there was nothing else but the warmth of his hand on mine, the way his eyes held me in place. I couldn't stop myself anymore. I leaned in closer, and before I knew it, his lips were on mine. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a flood of emotions I had buried for so long, the longing, the desire, the need to feel wanted. His mouth was soft, warm, and it felt like everything I had been craving. I hadn't realized how much I had missed this, how much I had missed being desired. When we finally pulled away, I was breathless, my heart hammering in my chest. I looked into Jake's eyes, and for a moment, I felt like I was waking up from a long, numb sleep. I'm sorry, I whispered, even though I wasn't sure who I was apologizing to. Maybe it was to Mark. Maybe it was to myself. Jake just smiled, his thumb brushing across my knuckles. You don't have to apologize, Emma. You're allowed to feel what you feel. You deserve to feel alive again. I wanted to believe him. But I also knew I was playing with fire. I had told Mark I was meeting a friend for lunch, and here I was, kissing my ex in a quiet cafe, feeling more alive than I had in months. I knew I should go back. I knew I should stop, but for some reason, I couldn't bring myself to leave. I could already hear the lies forming in my head, the excuse I'd give Mark when I came home later. Something about work running late, something that would make it all sound innocent. And maybe, just maybe, that was the most dangerous part of all. The tension in the air between Mark and me was unbearable. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, but no matter how hard I tried to explain, the words always came out wrong. I was angry at him for not noticing, for not seeing me. But I was also angry at myself for not doing something sooner, for letting things go so far. As I stood there in the living room, I realized something I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when I was falling apart inside. The truth was, I had been missing something for so long, something that I hadn't even realized how much I needed until I saw it again. And that something had a name, Jake. I had told myself I wouldn't do this. I had promised myself that I wasn't going to cross that line, that I wasn't going to make the same mistakes. But as the night stretched on, and the weight of Mark's accusations hung in the air, I knew what I needed to do. I needed to feel wanted again. I needed to feel alive. I didn't think it through. I didn't stop to ask myself what it would mean, how it would change everything. I just grabbed my phone and texted Jake, "Are you up?" His reply came almost instantly. Always. "What's up?" My fingers hovered over the keys, hesitation creeping in. But then I typed, "I can't stop thinking about earlier. I need to see you again." I didn't know what I expected, but when he replied, "I've been hoping you'd say that," the excitement hit me like a rush of adrenaline. I felt a pang of guilt, the familiar, suffocating guilt that I had ignored for months now. But it didn't stop me. It didn't stop me from getting in my car and driving through the quiet streets of the city, heading straight to Jake's apartment. The streets were eerily empty, the kind of quiet that made the world feel smaller, more intimate, more dangerous. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight, my knuckles turning white. I kept telling myself I wasn't making a mistake. But deep down, I knew I was. I knew I was walking into something that could destroy everything. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop thinking about Jake, about how he made me feel when we were together. It had been so long since anyone looked at me like that. It had been so long since I had felt that spark, that connection, that desire. And I craved it, desperately. When I pulled into his parking lot, I felt sick to my stomach. The weight of the decision I was making pressed down on me like a ton of bricks. But as I walked to his door, I pushed the fear aside. I had made my choice. And now, I had to see it through. Jake was already waiting for me when I knocked. His face lit up when he saw me standing there, and for the first time in a long time, I felt seen, wanted. His eyes were hungry with anticipation. And before I could say anything, he pulled me inside. The door closed behind me, and the world outside seemed to disappear. There was no Mark. There was no guilt. There was only the feeling of Jake's lips on mine. The way he kissed me like he had been waiting for this moment for years. I could feel my heart racing as he backed me against the wall, his hands sliding under my shirt, his lips trailing down my neck. I knew this wasn't right. I knew I was crossing a line that I couldn't come back from. But in that moment, all I could think about was how good it felt to be desired again. We didn't waste any time. Jake's hands were everywhere, his touch urgent, hungry. I tried to keep up, but everything felt like it was moving too fast, like I was trying to catch up to something I couldn't quite grasp. The pull between us was magnetic, and I let it take over, let it drown out the voice in my head that told me I was making a huge mistake. Somewhere in the blur of it all, I found myself on his bed, my body moving instinctively as Jake kissed me, touched me, made me feel things I hadn't felt in years. I knew it was wrong. I knew I shouldn't be doing this. But I couldn't stop. I didn't want to stop. Hours passed in a haze of passion and guilt, the whole world outside his apartment fading away. When it was over, when we were both lying there, tangled in the sheets, I felt an overwhelming sense of emptiness. I couldn't deny that it felt good. But the reality of what I had done was starting to hit me. I had just betrayed my husband. I had chosen to be with Jake, to feel wanted by him, even though I knew it would tear my marriage apart. But instead of feeling regret, I felt relieved. For the first time in a long time, I felt like me. Like the woman I used to be before everything with Mark started falling apart. I didn't stay long. I told Jake I had to go, that I couldn't be there any longer. I kissed him goodbye, promising I'd see him again, which deep down I knew was a lie. But I needed to get out of there. I needed to go back to my life, even though I knew it wouldn't be the same anymore. The drive home was slow, agonizingly slow. My mind kept replaying everything that had happened, everything I had done. My stomach was a twisted mess of guilt and excitement, like I was carrying the weight of a secret that I couldn't keep for long. When I finally pulled into my driveway, it felt like the world had shifted. Mark was inside, likely asleep, unaware of the betrayal that had just happened. I took a deep breath before I walked inside, trying to calm my shaking hands, trying to shove the guilt deep down inside. I passed through the living room and headed upstairs to the bathroom to shower. I scrubbed my skin like it could wash away the memory of Jake's touch. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get rid of the feeling of his hands on me, of his lips on mine. By the time I climbed into bed, I was exhausted, physically and emotionally. I closed my eyes, trying to fall asleep. But all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat, thumping in my ears like a drum. I could feel the weight of Mark's presence next to me, his breathing steady and deep. He didn't know. He had no idea what I had just done. But I knew. And for the first time in a long time, I was terrified that I had crossed a line that I could never come back from. The following days after I came home from Jake's place felt like I was living in some kind of fog, a half-reality where everything was just a blur of guilt, anxiety, and unspoken tension. Mark and I didn't talk much, at least not about anything important. I could feel the distance between us growing, like some invisible wall was rising, brick by brick. It was suffocating, and I knew deep down we were both just waiting for the inevitable, but neither of us knew how to fix it, or if it could even be fixed. Then came the night that shattered everything. It started like any other evening. Mark sitting on the couch, zoning out to a show, and me pretending to go about my usual routine. But the quiet wasn't comfortable anymore. It was heavy with everything we had avoided saying. I knew he was still upset, and if I was being honest with myself, I was too. But I couldn't face him. I couldn't face the truth of what I had done, and I could feel it in the way he looked at me, like he was seeing me for the first time, but not in the way a husband should see his wife. It was the look of someone who was broken, who knew something had changed, but didn't have the words to say it. He put down the remote and turned to face me. "We need to talk." I froze. My stomach dropped. Those 4 words were like a punch to the gut. I knew exactly what was coming, but hearing him say it out loud made it so much more real. I could already feel the walls coming down around me, and I wasn't sure I had the strength to stop it. "About what?" I asked, trying to sound casual, even though my heart was pounding. "About us, Emma." He took a deep breath, his jaw tight. "About everything." I wanted to tell him right then. Everything. The lies, the guilt, the mistake with Jake. But the words wouldn't come out. I felt paralyzed. All I could do was nod. "Look," he said, voice tight with frustration. "I don't know how much longer I can pretend everything is fine. It's like you're a stranger to me now. You've been distant for months. And I keep asking myself what happened. What changed? And then I find out this." His voice cracked on the last word. My heart was in my throat. I didn't need him to say it. I already knew. "I don't know what you mean," I muttered, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. "Don't," Mark said sharply, holding up a hand. "Don't lie to me, Emma. I know what happened. I know you've been seeing someone else. Don't even try to deny it." I felt my entire body go cold. I hadn't expected him to come out with it like that. But then again, I guess I shouldn't have been surprised. He had known. He had felt it long before I did. "Mark," I began, my voice shaking, but I couldn't finish. There was no way to fix this. There was no way to go back. "You really don't get it, do you?" he said, his voice a mix of anger and hurt. "You really think I didn't see it? I've been watching you pull away for months, and I've tried to be patient, to be understanding. But now I see. You've already made up your mind. You've already checked out." I shook my head, tears starting to sting at the corners of my eyes. "It's not like that. You don't understand. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I didn't want to hurt you." But Mark was done. The pain in his eyes was unbearable, and for the first time, I could see it. I could see how much I had broken him. "I'm not stupid, Emma. I feel the way you've been looking at me. I know when someone's not all in, and you haven't been. And now you've made your choice. You've picked him over me. Over us." His voice cracked again, and he turned away for a moment, trying to regain control. "So what now? What do we do, Emma? Do you think you can just come back and everything will be okay? Do you think I can just forgive you for what you did?" I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. I felt like I was suffocating. He was right. How could I ask for forgiveness for something like this? How could I fix a marriage that had been broken so completely? "I know what you're going to say," Mark continued, turning back to face me. "You're going to apologize. You're going to say you're sorry and that it was a mistake. But that's not enough, Emma. It can never be enough. You've already chosen. You've already made your choice." The anger and hurt in his voice cut through me like a knife. And then it hit me. This wasn't just about what I had done with Jake. This was about everything. The years of neglect, the emotional distance between us, the way we had both stopped trying, stopped seeing each other. This wasn't just one mistake. It was a series of them, building up until we couldn't avoid the collapse anymore. "I never meant for it to go this far," I whispered, my voice breaking. "But I needed something, Mark. I needed to feel wanted again. I needed to feel alive. And now you're going to leave me to go be with him, right?" Mark's voice was bitter, and the look in his eyes was one of resignation. "I'm not stupid. I know it's over. I can see it. You've already checked out." I wanted to scream, to beg him to understand, but I knew he was right. I had checked out. In my own way, I had already chosen. And even though I had tried to justify my actions, I knew I couldn't undo what I had done. I couldn't undo the way I felt. "I'm so sorry," I whispered again, tears streaming down my face. But my apology felt hollow, empty. It didn't change what had happened. It didn't take away the pain. Mark didn't respond. He just stood there for a moment, staring at me with a look that was more resigned than angry. And then he said the words that would haunt me for the rest of my life. "It's over, Emma." I stood there frozen as the reality of it sank in. He was right. It was over. The life I had known, the love I had thought would last forever, was gone. I had ruined it. I had let it slip through my fingers, and now there was no going back. Mark walked past me, heading for the door. But before he left, he turned back one last time. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Emma," he said, his voice cold. "I really do. But it won't be with me." And just like that, he was gone. I sat on the couch alone, the silence of the house swallowing me whole. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on me, and for the first time, I didn't know how to breathe.